Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great literature into gripping radio. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and today we're bringing you the final episode in our 5-part adaptation of The Most Dangerous Game, a classic American short story by the author Richard Connell. The American big game hunter Sanger Rainsford is in a living nightmare. Shipwrecked on a private Caribbean island, Rainsford has found himself at the mercy of the mad Russian General Zaroff, a merciless killer who has taken to hunting human beings for sport. After refusing to take part in a hunt as the general's companion, Rainsford has instead found himself pursued as prey, desperately trying to escape from Zaroff as the deadly old Russian hunter tracks him through his private jungle preserve, intent on adding another head to his collection. If Rainsford can survive for 3 days, Zaroff has promised him freedom, but the general is also supernaturally skilled, and Rainsford is in terrible danger. For some minutes, Rainsford merely clung to his branch, panting. I will not lose my nerve. I will not. He slid down from the tree and struck off again through the woods. His face was set, and he forced the machinery of his mind to function. 300 yards from his hiding place, he stopped where a huge dead tree leaned precariously on a smaller, living one. Throwing off his sack of food, Rainsford took his knife from its sheath and began to work with all his energy. The job was finished at last, and he threw himself down behind a fallen log 100 feet away. He did not have to wait long. The cat was coming again to play with the mouse. Following the trail with the sureness of a bloodhound came General Zaroff. Nothing escaped those searching black eyes, no crushed blade of grass, no bent twig, no mark, no matter how faint, in the moss. So intent was the Cossack on his stalking that he was upon the thing Rainsford had made before he saw it. His foot touched the protruding bough that was the trigger. Even as he touched it, the general sensed his danger and leapt back with the agility of an ape. But he was not quite quick enough. The dead tree, delicately adjusted to rest on the cut living one, crashed down and struck the general a glancing blow on the shoulder as it fell. But for his alertness, he must have been smashed beneath it. He staggered, but he did not fall, nor did he drop his revolver. He stood there, rubbing his injured shoulder, and Rainsford, with fear again gripping his heart, heard the general's mocking laugh ring through the jungle.
Rainsford! If you are within sound of my voice, as I suppose you are, let me congratulate you. Not many men know how to make a Malay man-catcher. Luckily for me, I too have hunted in Malacca. You are proving interesting, Mr. Rainsford. I am going now to have my wound dressed. It's only a slight one, but I shall be back. I shall be back.
When the general, nursing his bruised shoulder, had gone, Rainsford took up his flight again. It was flight now, a desperate, hopeless flight that carried him on for some hours. Dusk came, then darkness, and still he pressed on. The sound grew softer under his moccasins. The vegetation grew ranker, denser. Insects bit him savagely. Then, as he stepped forward, his foot sank into the ooze. He tried to wrench it back, but the muck sucked viciously at his foot as if it were a giant leech. With a violent effort, he tore his foot loose. He knew where he was now. Death Swamp and its quicksand. His hands were tight closed as if his nerve was something tangible that someone in the darkness was trying to tear from his grip. The softness of the earth had given him an idea. He stepped back from the quicksand a dozen feet or so and, like some huge prehistoric beaver, he began to dig. Rainsford had dug himself in France, when a second's delay meant death. That had been a placid pastime compared to his digging now. The pit grew deeper. When it was above his shoulders, he climbed out and from some hard saplings cut stakes and sharpened them to a fine point. These stakes he planted in the bottom of the pit with the points sticking up. With flying fingers he wove a rough carpet of weaves and branches, and with it he covered the mouth of the pit. Then, wet with sweat and aching with tiredness, he crouched behind the stump of a lightning-charred tree. He knew his pursuer was coming. He heard the padding sound of feet on the soft earth, and the night breeze brought him the perfume of the General's cigarette. It seemed to Rainsford that the General was coming with unusual swiftness. He was not feeling his way along, foot by foot. Rainsford, crouching there, could not see the General, nor could he see the pit. He lived a year in a minute. Then he felt an impulse to cry aloud with joy, for he heard the sharp crackle of the breaking branches as the cover of the pit gave way. He heard the sharp scream of pain as the pointed stakes found their mark. He leapt up from his place of concealment. Then he cowered back. 3 feet from the pit a man was standing with an electric torch in his hand.
"You've done well, Rainsford. Your Burmese tiger pit has claimed one of my best dogs. Again you score. I think, Mr. Rainsford, I'll see what you can do against my whole pack. I'm going home for a rest now. Thank you for a most amusing evening."
At daybreak, Rainsford, lying near the swamp, was awakened by a sound that made him know that he had new things to learn about fear. It was a distant sound, faint and wavering, but he knew it. It was the baying of a pack of hounds. Rainsford knew he could do one of 2 things. He could stay where he was and wait. That was suicide. He could flee. That was postponing the inevitable. For a moment he stood there thinking. An idea that held a wild chance came to him, and, tightening his belt, he headed away from the swamp. The baying of the hounds grew nearer, then still nearer, nearer, ever nearer. On a ridge Rainsford climbed a tree. Down a watercourse, not a quarter of a mile away, he could see the bush moving. Straining his eyes, he saw the lean figure of General Zaroff just ahead of him. Rainsford made out another figure whose wide shoulders surged through the tall jungle weeds. It was the giant Ivan, and he seemed pulled forward by some unseen force. Rainsford knew that Ivan must be holding the pack in leash. They would be on him any minute now. His mind worked frantically. He thought of a native trick he had learned in Uganda. He slid down the tree. He caught hold of a springy young sapling, and to it he fastened his hunting knife, with the blade pointing down the trail. With a bit of wild grapevine he tied back the sapling. Then he ran for his life. The hounds raised their voices as they hit the fresh scent. Rainsford knew now how an animal at bay feels. He had to stop to get his breath. The baying of the hounds stopped abruptly, and Rainsford's heart stopped too. They must have reached the knife. He shinned excitedly up a tree and looked back. His pursuers had stopped. But the hope that was in Rainsford's brain when he climbed died, for he saw in the shallow valley that General Zaroff was still on his feet, but Ivan was not. The knife, driven by the recoil of the springing tree, had not wholly failed. Rainsford had hardly tumbled to the ground when the pack took up the cry again. "Nerve, nerve, nerve," he panted as he dashed along. A blue gap showed between the trees, dead ahead. Ever nearer drew the hounds. Rainsford forced himself on toward that gap. He reached it. It was the shore of the sea. Across a cove he could see the gloomy grey stone of the chateau. 20 feet below him the sea rumbled and hissed. Rainsford hesitated. He heard the hounds. Then he leapt far out to sea. When the general and his pack reached the place by the sea, the Cossack stopped. For some minutes he stood regarding the blue-green expanse of water. He shrugged his shoulders. Then he sat down, took a drink of brandy from a silver flask, lit a perfumed cigarette, and hummed a bit from Madame Butterfly. General Zaroff had an exceedingly good dinner in his great panelled dining room that evening. 2 slight annoyances kept him from perfect enjoyment. One was the thought that it would be difficult to replace Ivan. The other was that his quarry had escaped him. Of course the American hadn't played the game, so thought the general as he tasted his after-dinner liqueur. In his library he read, to soothe himself, from the works of Marcus Aurelius. At 10 o'clock he went up to his bedroom. He was deliciously tired. There was a little moonlight, so before turning on his light he went to the window and looked down at the courtyard. He could see the hounds, and he wished them better luck next time. Then he switched on the light. A man, who had been hiding in the curtains of the bed, was standing there.
"Rainsford! How in God's name did you get in here?"
Swam. I found it quicker than walking through the jungle. The general sucked in his breath and smiled.
"I congratulate you. You have won the game."
Rainsford did not smile. "I am still a beast at bay. Get ready, General Zaroff." The general made one of his deepest bows.
"Splendid. One of us is to furnish a meal for the hounds. The other will sleep in this very excellent bed. On guard, Rainsford."
He had never slept in a better bed, Rainsford decided. Rainsford is sleeping in the general's bed, which can mean only one thing. The American has overcome his opponent, and Zaroff is no doubt making a final meal for his bloodthirsty hounds. We hope that you've enjoyed this conclusion to our 5-part adaptation of Richard Connell's The Most Dangerous Game. From our studio in Busan, this is your host, Joshua Cornwell, hoping that you'll be joining us again next week for another classic tale here on BeFM Drama.